Okay, then. Welcome everybody to the Bucky call. It is September 24th, Saturday evening. Manu, my friend, how are you doing this morning? How do you feel, and what would you like to take away from today?
I'm feeling great. It is, I can feel here the beginning of spring, and it's warmer, and there is energy in the air. I feel good. And what I expect is for us to complete concept 10, ephemeralization and invisible Commonwealth, and then start on concept 11, the prime design initiative. So I hope we're going to progress substantially, and especially think about applications and how we can use them to really improve our environment and further. So John, how do you feel? What do you expect?
Well, I'm feeling fantastic and very grateful. As I said, it's a stunning day here in Perth. It's a spring day. Just had a lovely walk in a beautiful park. Feeling incredibly fortunate. But it's been an interesting few weeks with the passing of the Queen and everything that's gone with it. We had a national holiday, a day of mourning on Thursday in memory of the Queen. And it was just interesting. My wife and I started the day by going to one beautiful park, looking out over the river and the city. And you could feel the difference in energy with it being a holiday. The planet, our part of the planet was so quiet and still without all the normal busy cars, people. And then we went to another park for lunch in the afternoon, and it was just very nice to feel connected with nature and to realize how fortunate we are. And I think of what's happening in lots of parts of the world. There's flooding, there's famine, there's drought, there's just so much damage being done to the planet, and we are so fortunate here. Made me incredibly grateful, but I'd also like to understand Bucky more in the hope that out of that I may be able to make some greater contribution to what he said, which is Utopia rather than Oblivion. So that's how I'm feeling. So Manu, how do you feel, and what do you hope to take out of today?
I've been in Joe.
Sorry?
Because of me.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, Joe. Okay, so
no worries. No worries.
We were talking, and so
yeah, no problem.
We've all had a say. So Joe, how do you feel? What do you hope to take out of today?
I feel pretty good after what you just said. That was beautiful. The appreciation for the stillness and the quietness, and learning to appreciate what we have, because sometimes I forget that, and when I do, it's not I get lost in myself. So that's not a good thing. So I appreciate your check-in. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm ecstatic that both you and Manu are here. It's always a privilege to be with both of you. This is our, I miss Kelly dearly. We're missing Steve. Steve he has a session tonight with his band, and Susan is saving the world with surgery. So we're saving somebody's life with surgery, with gallbladder surgery. So I miss her dearly. She's been on for about 3 weeks, or 3 sessions. I'm sorry, not 3 weeks. But I'm happy to be with both of you here this evening, and I'm looking forward to getting into Utopia and Oblivion as well, into some of the topics that are covered when we talk about ephemeralization, and some of the concept 11, some of the really important points that Bucky talks about when it comes to the prime design initiative. So with that, I will start sharing my screen. And John, would you?
Yes, I'm happy to read.
Do everybody a favor and read.
Okay.
Now, is this
concept 11? So we're starting with concept 11, right?
Actually,
no, we have to finish.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll start with right here. Start with the ephemeralization.
Okay.
Do you need me to zoom in at all? Like, is
No,
that
that's
good?
right. That's right.
Okay.
Yep. This ephemeralization, developed by the technology which preoccupied less than 1% of humanity in weapons development had never been thought of as benefiting society. That is why its conversion of 44% of humanity from have-nots to haves in 2/3 of a century has come as an utter surprise to humanity. 99.99+% of humanity don't know that this is why automobiles pack every highway and mechanical drudge savers, iceboxes and a higher standard of living are appearing as a flood all around the earth. Because ephemeralization is accelerating, it will complete the task of providing enough for all of humanity within another 34 years. This will occur despite the political systems which deliberately divide society and set one group against another. World man, disembarrassed of political systems, could accomplish universal success within 20 years. The 14-year difference might readily be the fatal difference within which a disgruntled man might touch off the atomic warhead retaliatory systems which would destroy humanity on Earth. Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
so a lot
the
to
last week,
unpack.
the last week, Bucky was spot on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But when it says this, it takes me back to Susan's type 1 and type 2 evolutionary processes. Remember that?
Type 1 and type 2, yes.
Yeah.
I remember the type 1, type 2, but I can't remember the detail.
Yeah, but what it says is in the out of conflict, there was some experimentation of things. And after conflict, those are applied to live. But it was done for all some other purposes. It wasn't then, it wasn't, how will I say it? It wasn't in accordance with
Nature,
huh?
nature,
Teleology. It wasn't teleological.
purpose. It wasn't
Yes.
purposeful, it wasn't intentional. That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's the first thing that I was actually thinking of when we had come across this, is that, that it had never been thought of as a benefiting the society. So the intention was never there
Yeah.
to ensure that everybody had enough to eat, and that everybody would benefit from the advancements in technology. So that's how do we then, and this is where it becomes utopian over oblivion, right? What are we choosing out of these two?
But there was one important sentence there. Is that the sentence is flawed all around the earth. They are ignorant to the fact that the flows, 99.9+% of humanity don't know that this is why automobile pack every highway and mechanical drudge savers, iceboxes, and high standard of living are appearing as flawed all around the world. Is that ephemeralization actually will happen whether you want it or not, isn't it?
But what he also says is if we'd done it faster, we might have contributed more to the saving of the earth and utopia, and that in fact it's the politicians that are delaying the ephemeralization.
I completely agree with that. I mean, it becomes as to, the political systems have, they've ended up exploiting people in one way, shape, or form, or actually, shall I say, been inefficient in how resources have been allocated. The interesting thing is, how would we define have-nots and haves? I think that that's a really important definition to have, or to, no pun intended, but to kind of hash out. And the reason I say that is, what is enough? That question has to be answered, because when you're talking about you know, progress per se. And you know, converting 44% of humanity from have-nots. What does have-not mean? What do you think?
Well, is that below the subsistence level? We've got a number of guidelines. There's a subsistence level, there's a poverty level. Most developed economies have a point at which they regard people as being able to survive. And below that, they're below the subsistence level, they're below the poverty level. So they go hungry, they don't have the basic essentials. That's my understanding of the haves and have-nots. If you've got somewhere to live, if you've got shelter, if you've got enough food to eat to avoid starvation, if you've got an education and some sort of medical system, then you're a have, not a have-not. If you haven't got somewhere safe to sleep, if you don't have enough to avoid starvation, if you don't have medicine and education, then you're a have-not.
Well,
My understanding, anyway.
And I mean, and I think that that's a good definition, but there's also this just an element of safety as well here in the United States, like, you know, feeling safe as well, in addition to.
Well, can you feel safe in the United States? So does that mean, Joe, that you're packing a gun? Does that mean you're packing a gun? Don't
exactly.
you have to pack a gun to feel safe in the US?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that, essentially. That's part of that, but I think it's.
What do you call enough, as you say?
I've never been able to define that. You know, I've never been able to define that. I mean, meaning I've been able to define it for myself, but I can't define it for anyone else. It's very difficult for me to do. I think some of the basic needs that we talk about at Maslow's hierarchy, obviously, are along those lines.
Well, you have to look, I think that it has to do most as to looking at the whole earth. I don't want to be ideological, but what it means is, well, you might be having what you have by siphoning off and poisoning somewhere else.
Right.
Right? So I think it has to do with really
justice.
I don't know. I don't want to go as high as that, but yes.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But even and that gets difficult to define sometimes, though.
Yes.
And
it is difficult because there'll be disagreement about the criteria, but I think it's fairly simple. Somewhere to live, somewhere to shelter you from the elements, enough food not to starve, enough food to be able to live healthily, education and medical care, I regard as the essentials for a have. If you haven't got medical care, if you haven't got education, if you haven't got shelter, and if you haven't got enough to eat, then you're a have-not. I mean, you may argue about, you know, the standard of living and what the income is. I mean, I saw some figures recently in Australia in terms of pensions and what a person receives from a pension. And I think it was that the sort of the minimum income necessary for subsistence in Australia for a single person was about $45,000 Australian a year, and for a couple was about $65,000 Australian a year. Now, that would, of course, depend on whether you owned your accommodation or not. And what's happened in Australia, right across Australia, there is a screaming shortage of accommodation at the moment. It's really, COVID has brought it to a head, and for some reason, there just is such a low vacancy rate with accommodation and such a limited supply of accommodation that people are bidding above the asking rent to get properties to rent, and there just aren't enough. Now, part of it is we haven't been producing enough accommodation, and we certainly haven't been producing enough affordable accommodation. Most accommodation in Australia is, this was Bucky actually talked about this, very inefficiently built. It's very inefficiently built in terms of the materials and labour involved. So we have, you know, some quite high standard housing, but we don't have anywhere near enough of it, and it's very, very expensive. inappropriately expensive. So Bucky said, you know, we should be building accommodation in factories and even delivering it on site by helicopter, prefabricated, not, you know, in Australia, we build on site, brick and tile, all the materials are delivered there. There are delays with materials and trades, a lot of wastage, the wastage that's removed from the site, the extra bricks, the extra tiles, the extra bits and pieces. So we have a very inefficient building system overall. I think the accommodation in the US is very different to Australia. A lot of it's built out of timber. It's certainly lower cost than Australia, some of the figures I've seen. So, you know, we've got an average, the average cost of housing in Perth now is about just over $500,000.
Wow.
And so that's very expensive.
That is very expensive. And there's a lot that goes into this too. There's always trade-offs. There's always
But
trade-offs.
we're talking about ephemeralization here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But what ephemerization goes with often, and unfortunately, is what you call capture.
Yes.
In other words, the gains are captured by a group, and they call it profit. Okay, and there is no end to that profit. Is that either as long as the function is to maximize profit, there might be a problem. Because what, in the world of abundance, prices should be coming down.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, absolutely.
But that's not what translates ephemeralization as we live in it.
Well, there are examples. There are examples of ephemeralization, and what we need is a societal shift. So, for example, my understanding, take housing, there's a very different perception and attitude in the US because of the way housing is built, and obviously there are lower costs. You can get a house, I understand, in many places in the US, a reasonable home to live in for $200,000 or $300,000. Is that right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I remember, but it's interesting growing up, you know, the homes were, you know, would have been $30,000. So that it's, you know, something now that's $150,000 or $200,000 would, you know, have been $30,000 or $40,000 at one point. So there are, you know, there have been, you know, price increases, even though we are cheaper. In some
but still nowhere near as much as ours.
You know, because if you look at it, many years ago, the price of the cost of housing for a family was measured as a percentage or a multiplier of the yearly income.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now, and the rule was 1/3.
So 3 years of income. 3 years of income would buy you a home.
3 times the income is the cost of housing.
See,
You are getting cheaper in an ephemeral way. If today I was told that the cost of housing is now 1/5.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for an average family in Australia, an average home, you know, not right in the city or whatever, but it's probably going to be about 5 to 1, 5 years of gross income.
Something to think about here, and as we just push forward, because I do want to get to this next point, but something to think about is that also the environmental regulations sometimes drive prices up.
Yeah.
So I mean,
But
that's
also government costs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think there's state, local, and other government costs that go into that in the United States. And so there are a lot of things that factor into those costs.
But Joe,
good.
You never have any measure that is really, really effective for as long as the whole environment is distorted by inflation, basically by money.
Right.
And especially when what you call inflation, that measure changes. and it changes all the time just by definition.
Hmm.
And
That's
it's a
right.
big problem. What is your index? What are you measuring against?
That's a
Right?
great point. Yeah. In and of
Yes.
itself,
Against all perception, the cost of living has just been going higher for the average human. It's been going higher. It doesn't matter whether you live in what's the so-called advanced country or in developing country, in underdeveloped country. It is the same. It is what we know is becoming expensive. Why? If there is so much gain in productivity, if there is ephemeralization, why is it not manifested practically in the living? I mean, you have, I don't know how many countries, 200 in the world. I don't know how many are bankrupt. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I want to talk about here is that where he was a little bit off in his prediction. This will occur despite political systems deliberately dividing society and set one group against another. That's happening.
Oh, he was spot on there.
I
You
mean,
just have
that,
to be a Republican or a Democrat in the US, don't you, Joe?
oh my goodness, yes. I mean, you know, that
Divides society and sets one group against another.
yeah, that we're seeing that here today. You know, and our political system has done it. I mean, you know, that the way it's set up, you know, that it's set up for corruption. So that part wasn't achieved though, because of ephemeralization accelerating it will complete the task
So
of
this was written, what, in the 60s?
yeah, Manu, you would know better than I probably.
I think
Right?
this was written in
This
the
was
60s.
written in, yeah, in like in the
Mid-60s, I think,
60s.
about mid-60s.
Yeah.
So therefore,
Yeah.
it should have been achieved by 2000. So we're actually 22 years behind Bucky's timetable. That's the point you're making, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, yes, that is the point.
He said 34 years, allowing for the political system. So even with the political system, it should have been achieved by 2000. We're 22 years later, and it's actually getting worse rather than better.
Well, we are, the way we're discussing here, we are absorbing ourselves. Who is in critical examination?
Who is in critical examination right now?
Yeah. Critical and final examination, who?
We are, humanity.
Exactly. So the question we're talking about, yes, his prediction is out. What are we done? Are we educated? Are we taking positions? It will never change if individual, educated, don't take the risk and take positions. Do we have, can we say we have integrity in our own lives?
No.
That's where the point is. Remember, the duality has always got systems, processes. There's got to always get, you know, what is the other side of it? Because what has continued, unfortunately, today is that there has been ephemeralization, but it's been captured. The world has been captured.
It's been captured by a few, essentially.
Yes.
I
mean,
agree.
we're still celebrating as almost universal values that one person can come out and say is $1 trillion worth, and then what? What value does it have for humans? You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So the
no,
skewness of a distribution is what they call the Gini coefficient is extreme. And when you have, when a guy like Ray Dalio cite conditions, and he says one of the things that is really worried is that skewness of income distribution. And that engender only conflicts. So these conflicts that we're saying are occurring are probably a consequence of that, at least influenced by that.
I agree with that.
But also we're seeing radicalization. So if we look at what happened in Syria, we look at the more radical Muslims, and people are protesting. I mean, we did see the positive of that in the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989, yeah. And then you contrast Gorbachev with Putin, and they are two extremes. Gorbachev was, from what we know of him, a reasonable person, whereas Putin appears to be the complete opposite, a dangerously unbalanced man. And this is what Bucky was referring to, you know, the fatal difference.
I don't know.
Disgruntled man.
I don't know if you can say, you know, really, I think on both sides of a conflict, you have dangerous men.
Oh, yes.
On both sides, because you have to take everything within the complete context before you can say anything. I mean, there's been so much, you know, out there, and I hate to I would not like to get myself prisoner of just one point of view. You don't take side, and then you look at the situation, and you see that there is a lot at stake. And there's a lot at stake because the premises are wrong. Two wrong don't make a right. Wrong on wrong is wrong. It defies the laws of math. It's not plus. and that is the issue, in my opinion. It is, because if that were not the issue, it wouldn't escalate the way it is. There is underlying complications and egos at play that really, unfortunately, we are all the victims. We're really all victims, in my opinion. Nobody asked Joe's opinion. No. Nobody asked anybody's. It's just like that. So the environment is changing for everybody. And as Bucky says, what will change? What will have a spark of light and of really virtue in all of this is the individual. Because if you are educated, if you have equanimity, you're not going to join the masses. You're not going to get into a groupthink, right?
That's right.
So it's one less.
Or you'd hope
on both sides. All sides of a conflict underestimate the invisible silent. Those who don't agree with either of so-called opposed camp and just want something that's good. Unfortunately, the good is so difficult to produce. It's always very difficult to express and to produce.
I was in a conversation today a little bit about, you know, the use of atomic weapons, the likelihood of it, and it is scary. It is scary. It's just and how that may set off and where we are with that. But
Yeah, I don't know how many times we can pulverize this planet.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's
I
good.
don't know how many times.
That's
But that's what Bucky says, is that we have right without accountability. You see, we will never finish action, reaction, and resultant and consequences. Because we won't have time. In our cockiness of type 1 or type A, I can't remember it was type A or type 1, Joe.
Yeah, you're right.
Evolution type 1 or evolution type 2 or
Oh.
evolution type A or type B. I can't remember the
Oh,
term.
because no, you know what? And I don't have my Bucky book. I'm not writing on my Bucky book at this moment. Type 1, type 2 evolution. I was actually going to ask you to expand on that because I know
No, that's what I
we
meant.
talked about. Yeah.
Evolution type 1 or type 2. And we're debating why it's part of ephemeralization continuing at the accelerated pace. Don't we see the result globally in terms of heightening of a living standard as Bucky predicted?
Right.
And we're saying that it is because type 1 evolution, at least for our time, the time that we live in, has been very, very much alive in that the benefits of ephemeralization have been captured by minorities to serving purposes that might not be the purposes of Utopia.
So
or that of Oblivion. Because
Yeah,
we can all feel now that today we are more in danger, don't we? I mean, 2022 is different from 2018
yes, it is.
or from 2015. Let's just go back that way. It's very different. You can feel it, that we are really in danger. And if any bomb is dropped, no matter if it is retaliated or not, and you stand, you know, not only are you going to completely pulverize those places you were targeting, but people on the side are also going to be affected in ways that are dramatic. I mean, I don't know if you can remember Chernobyl.
I can, yeah.
You remember that, John?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm sorry.
Chernobyl.
Oh,
Chernobyl.
Chernobyl. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
But the consequences were where?
Well, the consequences were covered up. I don't believe that the true consequences were ever publicly made available.
Yep. But they were far-reaching, that's my point. And that was just an accident. Imagine a nuclear device.
A deliberate use of a nuclear device.
You know, exploded. What it would be. So that's why I was saying that this happening, people are ignoring that the effect of ephemeralization is happening all around the earth. And Bucky is uncompromising on that. We are all inhabitants of the same spaceship, that is Earth. So whether it's Australia, America, Africa, okay. Probably it doesn't matter much if some boundaries are trespassed. And that is, to me, what we have to worry about. Not to play too much with, I mean, kids can be playing on the border of a fort that is not properly fenced. For as long as you play, yeah, but you take a ball and a kid is kind of pursuing that ball, and then it's gone. Anyway.
Shall we continue?
Yes.
Sure.
Hang on,
Where were we at?
so right at the prime concept 11.
Yeah, but we read any.
We're just starting it.
Okay. Concept 11, Prime Design Initiative. Strategy for attaining and sustaining the comprehensive design, conception and realization initiatives by the individual in the area of the massive world corporations and massive sovereign geographical states, which only seemingly overwhelm the individual with their economic advantages in respect to investment capital, working capital, credit capital, and influence. Okay.
Any comments or questions about that?
So he
I
says
think that
all
that
about
is
the
exactly what
individual.
we were discussing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about the individual. And he said that the large corporations and governments seemingly overwhelm the individual. Economic strategy of the individual. Comprehensive ephemeralization involves original thought, invention, scientific calculations, technical drawings, scientific prototyping, testing, production, engineering. This brings us to the economic strategy of the individual. I have had all manner of experience in initiating the reduction of inventions to industrial use. I have experience owning and renting shops, owning and renting tools, hiring of individuals, and dealing in the great complexes of accounting and maintenance of such high priority technology.
Let's,
So he says,
yeah,
I've been there.
I think we
I've
should
been
stop
there.
right there. I mean, let's just, something to think about with even the economic strategy of the individual. Comprehensive
Mhm.
ephemeralization involves original thought, invention, scientific calculations, technical drawings, scientific prototyping, testing, production, and engineering. That in order to bring an idea to fruition, it requires more than an individual. That's something to, that we tend to think of as one individual that can, one person as kind of bringing an idea or making something happen in this. It takes an entire group to make that happen. So
But
the
a group isn't a guarantee. I think what Bucky's saying is it requires an individual to initiate it. I mean, my experience is that governments generally are hopelessly inefficient with commercial processes and particularly management of money. So whether it's a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs or whoever it is, he says it takes an individual. Sure, they need to employ people, they need to grow a company, they may need to go public to raise capital, but it'll be one or a group of individuals who are driving it. Who is driving Apple? Who is driving Microsoft? Who is driving? It all starts with an individual. It's not governments that build major, productive, long-term business initiatives. There are some governments.
It's an
I see
interesting
two things,
discussion.
John.
Beg
I
pardon,
see,
Manu?
I see two things
Yeah.
stemming from what you say. Is if you take highly successful corporations, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they are successful because the employees or the individuals in there are empowered. I wouldn't say, I don't
Yes.
like to use the word empowered, right? They are empowered. You can have, you won't have a flow if the network, the what you call the transceivers
Mm-hmm.
are not managing and letting flow the energy in a way that is congruent with whatever you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As a consequence of that, that individual got to be, let's just say, competent, empowered in that system. Yep. The second thing is that, and the most difficult, is that the individual have, and he has to be permitted to be lifelong committed to education. That's where you see that this is evolving into what we call self-discipline. You get? It started from the most general, the most macro, and it's coming down, describing that I wouldn't say down, but in, describing that duality to such a way that not only do you have to have an environment, the largest possible that we're conscious of, but locally, what we do is congruent with that in such a way that the system works around.
Mhm.
Interesting.
So if you see this thing, that's why I'm so interested in self-discipline. I think it comes in initiative maybe 12 or 13.
It
I don't
is
know which
12
one
or
it is.
I think it is 12 or 13. I forget.
Yes, but you can see
12.
that it is evolving to that. General, I mean, you can say, you
Okay,
can talk about.
let's just take two more companies as an example. And again, I'm only speaking from what I've read. So there's a company called Tesla
Mhm.
and a man called Elon Musk. Now, my understanding from the media is that he's something of an autocrat and he runs that company from the top down. And he has said, for example, recently, you will be back in the office or you will be sacked. So there's not a lot of freedom or initiative. It's my way or the highway. Everybody will be in the office or they'll be out of a job. That's Tesla. An alternative is a company called Atlassian. I don't know whether you've heard of Atlassian.
Sure.
Australian company, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
founded by two Australians who are now billionaires.
Mm.
They're just building a new state-of-the-art, completely self-sustaining building in the middle of Sydney for their staff. I think the cost of the building is 1.4 billion. But it will be an absolute state of the art, completely neutral in terms of pollution, energy use, everything else, self-sustaining building. But they have said to all of their staff, I have the partner of my niece works for Atlassian. Atlassian have said to all of their staff, you can work from home for as long as you like.
Mhm.
So Elon Musk is saying you're in the office or else. Atlassian is saying, we trust you, you work from home. You don't have to come to the office, but we're building you what's going to be probably the best office in the world.
Mhm.
And so just interesting to compare those two. Each appears to be reasonably successful at the moment, but over time, I wonder whether Tesla will survive and do as well as Atlassian.
Mhm.
It's an interesting
It's what you're
question.
talking about. It's inspiring and encouraging the individuals within the organization to use their initiative.
Yes, I mean, and Atlassian has always been that way,
Hmm.
where they would actually give their employees Fridays, I think, off in order to solve problems, just to be more creative. They give, in fact, they focus on autonomy
Mhm.
as part of their, it's part of their company, kind of their management style. So the only thing I would say is it's interesting because they're two different industries.
Mhm.
And I
One's
think they do.
production, yes, one's production, the other one's using software and technology. You don't have to be there.
Yeah, and I think eventually, I think that you're going to see it'll be job dependent, but it'll also be, I think, something when getting to this particular question, I think the results aren't in yet about whether we should be in the office or not. And I think that that's something each company is going to have to experiment quite a bit with how much autonomy they're going to provide their employees. I think high performing employees are going to be able to demand whatever they want.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that it's, as far as most employees, it'll be interesting to see.
But the next paragraph is interesting too, because the next
Yeah,
paragraph takes
let's go
this
ahead
whole
there.
issue further. And Bucky talks about not owning your premises and not owning your tools and not having large staff. So it's quite interesting.
What do you make of what was it? I thought I saw it. This brings economic strategy to the individual. I have a manner of experience initiating the reduction of inventions to industrial use. I must have must have been somewhere else where I read the basically how to account for for tools that are not in use. But anyway, oh, there it is. It's below. I just
Mhm.
saw it. Yeah. Okay.
But I
So
think what John is saying there in that first, the one that started with energy strategy, economic strategy of the individual, is the phrase he says, I have had all manner of experience in initiating the reduction of invention to industrial use.
Mm.
I've experienced owning, you have to really tune yourself into becoming a student of learning and applications.
Mhm.
That's one point that right. If you don't think of, and you don't share, and you don't experience, you don't take risk, there will be setbacks, there will be a cost to it, but you have to be committed to that.
Yes.
Then you are out of step with what you call the scientific process itself.
But it's interesting because he says, what he's saying is we've got to evolve, we've got to progress, we've got to ephemeralize, we've got to do more with less. And he's talking about here how the individual best contributes to ephemeralization and utopia rather than oblivion. And
Exactly.
I find this particularly important because I've been involved in various businesses. I've owned real estate, I've owned the offices, I've employed staff, I've had successes and failures, sometimes more failures than successes, I think. I've tried new things, some have worked, some haven't worked. And I'm really keen to draw everything out of this I can and then apply it for myself. I've had all manner of experience in protecting of the individual initiative. And I've learned some important lessons, though frequently just sort of bankruptcy. Right? So what he's saying is we've got to teach the individual, encourage the individual to maintain their originality, to be willing to try new things, to develop economic strategies, to contribute to ephemeralization and utopia without losing confidence, without going broke. And he says here, and it's interesting, I'm jumping ahead now, the next paragraph, it is fatal, it is fatal for an invention developing pioneer to own his own shop and tools. It's a really interesting concept because it forces him to exploit his non-production tools with paying products involving repeat performances that should be bound to vitiate experimental work. So basically, if you're successful and just keep doing the same thing, you're not going to evolve, you're not going to carry out experimental work. It is fatal for an inventor explorer to build up any large staff dependent on any one economic product or focus. Because we've seen, particularly in the last 20 years, people with an apparently successful business suddenly out of business. And one of the areas that's interesting at the moment is motor vehicles. I mean, if you think about motor vehicles, Bucky wrote in the 60s about how unproductive and damaging it was to the economy and the environment to pay people to sit for hours in traffic jams, burning rare fossil fuels and polluting the environment. He's talking about particularly big cities, peak hour traffic, and many of those people didn't contribute anything. Well, we had layers and layers of middle management, huge corporations, where people would spend 3 hours a day in traffic, pumping out pollution to go to an office 1.5 hours each way, where they would sit and manage the people below them who would manage the people below them. And in fact, if you think of the changes that have occurred in big organisations over the last 60 years, the layers of middle management that have been stripped away, the change in the nature of businesses that have remained in business. So he said, you don't want large staff. You don't want to be dependent on any one economic product or focus.
Right.
In fact, it's interesting because I got married 46 years ago and I had my suit made by a very successful business that was Australia-wide. It had shops. It produced men's clothing. It had shops across Australia. And a few years later, they went broke. And they just ceased to exist. So they'd had their product was men's clothing, including tailor-made men's clothing. And they were national, and they owned the premises and they had the staff, and they were dependent on one product, basically. And they ceased to exist. And so
it's an
I want to
interesting.
get
You bring up a really interesting point. So one thing that I think that it goes to a couple different points. You talked about the idea that middle management has been stripped away, and
in
that
large
there,
part,
in large part, there's fewer employees per se, and so we have fewer employees being stripped away, which means we're doing more with less.
yeah, ephemeralization. Yeah,
It's ephemeralization. However, the benefits of the ephemeralization are not only going to a few. So it's interesting to see that, in a way, ephemeralization, that's an example of how essentially the worker is being left out of the benefits that are of ephemeralization in certain cases.
Okay, let's get back again.
Individuals.
Yeah, that's important, Joe. But also it goes back to the society and the economy with which compare Singapore and Australia. Overall, I rate Singapore as more economically successful than Australia. However, Australians, if we're going to generalize, have a higher level of individuality and initiative. Talk about Atlassian, also talk about Canva as another example of Australian originality, building a hugely successful global business.
That's right.
Now, some years back, Singapore started to promote entrepreneurship. They realized that it was a very well managed and regulated state, but what they created had stifled initiative. There weren't many entrepreneurs as such. So you had a state run very soundly economically, but without a lot of entrepreneurs, most people in employment being good, doing what they were told. And so Singapore has deliberately set out to recruit, to attract, to bring overseas initiative. They persuaded George Lucas to take his business to Singapore by saying, no tax for 5 years, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and we'll provide staff for you. And so the design studios, as I understand, are still in Singapore for George Lucas. They've set out to attract they attracted one of the world leaders in cancer research from the United States. I think they even shipped his dog to Singapore. But they, again, the same thing. We'll set you up. We'll give you a laboratory. We'll give you really bright people. We'll provide you with medical researchers. We'll make you pay no tax for 5 years. We'll do this. We'll do that. Things that countries like Australia, I can't imagine Australia saying to somebody, come to Australia and we'll let you not pay tax for 5 years. So Singapore have been very good at that, but they haven't, because of their education system and the way the state runs, encouraged initiative in the way that Australia has. There are more individuals who are willing to exercise their initiative. So it's very interesting. There's this huge change taking place around the world. I mean, I read an article yesterday, somebody who had been an expat living and working in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's facing a flood of expats leaving Hong Kong at the moment. So the economy in Hong Kong is suffering, rents are coming down. Many of them are moving to Singapore. Rents in Singapore are jumping by between 25 and 40%. At the end of your lease, the rent will go up somewhere between 25 and 40% in Singapore at the moment.
Wow.
But in some cases, they were talking about one expat who worked with a bank who'd come back to Australia and was having to work online with occasional visits to Singapore because it was just too expensive for them to live in Singapore. So technology has allowed people to be more remote from where they're working.
Right.
Which is part of the ephemeralization.
But even that is something for a few. You know, that you can, you know, how many employees or how you have to have a skill set that is desired in order to be working remote like that, in my opinion. And so I think that even though you're doing more with less, even less office space, things like that, again, I think it's ephemeralization. The benefits are often being seen by fewer people than rather than more. That's my overall point.
But tradesmen in Australia can earn a fortune at the moment, particularly in Western Australia. The cost of laying bricks has jumped astronomically because there's such a shortage. There's huge demand for building and there's a shortage of materials and skilled labour. So tradesmen can earn huge amounts at the moment. I mean, I'll give you an example. I go to a hairdresser, a men's barber, and he recently recruited a woman who was an experienced hairdresser. Then at the last moment, she said, "I'm not coming." He said, "Why?" She said, "I've been offered a job driving a truck on a mine site in the north of Western Australia, and I can earn far more than I can as a hairdresser. So I'm going to go up there. They're going to spend 3 months training me and give me full pay for the 3 months while they train me. Then I'm going to sit in a truck and drive a truck and I'm going to earn $120,000 a year."
Wow.
But what they are doing, of course, is mechanizing the trucks. They are developing autonomous vehicles that drive themselves. But in the meantime, they're paying huge amounts because they have to have somebody to drive the truck. The demand for iron ore is such they've got to get it out of the ground and get it to the port and ship it. And so they will pay astronomical wages for what was relatively unskilled labour and skill it up. But those jobs will disappear. She works 2 weeks on, 1 week off. So she flies up, spends 2 weeks in the truck earning $120,000 a year and a week back in Perth. And he can't get a hairdresser. He's desperate for staff and can't get them.
I would say, John, you know, all of that we live in, and it seems like he's saying two things there. The first is the aspect of if you're a designer, it is fatal to own your own shop and a tool and have large staff. What does it translate into practically? And I've seen it in small businesses. Is their fixed cost.
Right.
People have no idea about what fixed cost is.
None.
And how much multiplier do you need just to support the fixed cost? In the case of somebody who's doing R&D or something, you are burning at a high rate. So the implication is that if ephemeralization has to really, really be effective and beneficial, you need corporations like Atlassian. You need many of those that can tolerate the rate of burning of those who are entrepreneurs, of those who are burning those researchers to expand the boundaries. That is the one lesson that I got from there. And today, I think that it becomes, you know, Bucky was before that era, but today we're in an era of inflation. It is fatal not to be aware of what inflation is and what it is really, and how it is produced, and what is the causes of it. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
If you take some terms of exchange and you put them and you see how things have changed, you'll be surprised at the contrast between measuring inflation the way we measure today and the reality. The reality is most people have gotten poorer. Even in developed countries, they have gotten poorer. So your guy is pursuing his truck in northeastern or northwestern Australia, probably, you know, if he's mining company. He's going to go there, that's fine. But all of those things, can they buy him what he wants? Are they going to improve his standard of living? And you cannot grasp that if you are not aware of what's going on.
Hello, Susan.
Hi, guys.
Did the
It's so
patient
good to see
survive?
you. It's so good to see you.
Well, it's lovely. I'm glad to drop in. I hope I can catch up.
Oh, you'll it's just good to see you. Is your patient going to survive, as John asked?
Oh, she'll be great. She'll be home after breakfast.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's fantastic. Just glad to have you here.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please keep going and I'll be listening.
Absolutely.
But there is definitely something here that will interest you, Susan. John, go
good.
on. Read this.
Can I do a brief summary?
Sure. Yeah, I think
Bucky's
that would be,
talking about the importance of the individual and the importance of the individual's contribution to ephemeralization. He's talked about the obstruction that governments provide to ephemeralization. And in the 1960s, he calculated that within 34 years, we could have ephemeralized to the state where there was a reasonable standard of living for everybody in the world. He calculated that it could have happened within 20 years without government obstruction, but that it would take 34 years with government instruction. So we're running at least 22 years behind Bucky's timetable now.
So you can tell he was an optimist for sure.
Yeah, he was an optimist, but perhaps he underestimated the obstruction of governments. And there's a particular sentence which is so relevant to what we're dealing with at the moment about the dangers of one person with access to nuclear weapons being trigger happy. Very, very topical at the moment. And so now he's on to the individual and the importance of maintaining the opportunity, the environment for an individual to ephemeralize, to design new things, new products. And he talked about top-heavy corporations. We just talked about middle management and the shifts in the last 60 years. We talked about Atlassian. Are you familiar with Atlassian, the Australian founded company?
I've heard of them. They sometimes sponsor the National Public Radio that I listen to from time to time, but I don't know
Founded by
anything
two
about them.
Australians who are billionaires, and we were contrasting Atlassian with Tesla because Atlassian has said to all of their staff, you can work from home for as long as you like. You do not have to come to the office. But the other side of that coin is they're building a state-of-the-art headquarters, an office building in the centre of Sydney, which will be completely energy efficient, self-sufficient. I think it's costing them 1.4 billion. So you don't have to come to the office. You can work from home forever if you like, but we're going to give you the best working conditions in the world, including environmentally, and in terms of contributing to the future of the planet. There will be no pollution. The building will be self-sufficient. With Tesla, where, you know, it's Elon Musk's dictate was you will return to the office or you will be fired. So each apparently successful corporations, but is one likely to last longer than the other? And so we've just been talking about the nature of employment, the nature of skills, the nature of ephemeralization. We used Housing as a very good example. Manu's figure was that some years ago, the rule of thumb was the cost of a house was 3 years of your income. And I said that in Australia, it's certainly far higher. In fact, Manu, I've been thinking since we spoke, it's probably between 5 years and 8 years of earnings to purchase your home, and that's a modest home. We talked about the inefficiency of housing construction in Australia by comparison with the US. I understand that US houses are built differently and more effectively. Bucky said they should be built in factories and delivered on site to be manufactured in the most efficient manner.
That's definitely a trend. I allow myself one little YouTube every night as I'm going to bed, and a bunch of them have been on the lovely prefab housing boom.
Yep.
Just
Yeah.
loving how many of them are like self-contained. They could all be, a number of them could be off grid.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so now we're on to Bucky saying you shouldn't own your premises, you shouldn't have large staff, you should be a nimble individual. And in fact, we haven't gone on to the next bit yet, where he talks about he did work for the Chrysler Corporation, and Walter Chrysler found that Bucky could develop a prototype better, cheaper than the company itself could. So his rule was that it took Bucky a third of the time and a quarter of the cost to develop a new prototype than it did the corporation itself, Chrysler Corporation.
The Chrysler Corporation could produce it much more effectively.
No, they couldn't develop the prototype. Bucky was talking about
Right. No, but once you got to the prototype, then
then the corporation could build the cars, yeah.
Well, even then they struggled with certain, like, there are certain processes that were being implemented at Toyota that were much more efficient eventually.
Yeah, that's right. So a
Yeah,
lot of
but
it's
there
the
is-
brute force.
John, there is an important word here. You say for a pioneering entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
that's
he's
when
saying
it's
we need
factored.
more
He didn't say
pioneering
that you shouldn't
entrepreneurs.
own, yes. Say for a pioneering, you're starting your thinking, your systems. It is an impediment because you are going to be burning a lot. And if you own it, you are going, your working capital will be gone before you do anything. Okay. Susan is she's thinking.
Oh, as I'm trying to understand, Manu, you said all your capital will be burned before you do anything. I'm probably missing part of that sentence.
No, it's Bucky who say it is fatal for a pioneering entrepreneur to own his premises, to own his tools, because he's had to be going into a process of experimenting and dispensing of resources that he have. And if you own them, by the time you fail, you fail, you start again, you have exhausted, your life blood. Wouldn't have enough resources to continue. You go bankrupt.
Right.
But what's the alternative? Like, who else is gonna back you as a pioneer?
Well, no, I think you've got to be on the edge. You've got to be on the edge to be driven. That in fact, if you get comfortable financially, you become less inventive and less efficient.
There you go.
So what I read into saying, we need these individuals, we need the entrepreneurs, and we need them to be motivated by being driven to succeed, operating very leanly.
But I think that we can also add to this the dimension of you talking about contrasting Atlassian and Tesla, in that systems and organization that we have in place and procedures have to allow individual to fail. So it's by design that you build an organization or you set up things to allow people to fail, because if you don't fail, you can't progress.
Well, I agree with you, but it's a lot cheaper to fail in software than it is in an automobile. So, but you're right to a certain degree that individuals do need to be able to fail and fail fast.
I think that was
Talking about atlassian, you know, I read that they allow at one point that the staff can spend up to 30% of their time doing what they want.
That's true. Solving a
Of their
problem.
whole time doing what they want. And
Yeah.
the consequence of that is that they say their innovations, a good chunk of new product, new software that they came up with came from that, you know.
Oh, they fixed a lot of bugs using that methodology, and that strategy has been used at other companies like 3M. With 3M, they used to give you 15% of your time to, I believe it was 15%, to imagine something, and that's where essentially the sticky note had come from. Somebody had come up with the idea for a sticky note in their time, just random thinking. I mean, there, and the companies sometimes structure things like Google Labs or Bell Labs the way it used to be. You know, these companies do structure themselves for innovation. Sometimes they just don't have a way of integrating innovation. You know, a lot of walked out of Xerox PARC. That's the reason we have Apple today. Anyway, I'm a little bit off topic.
I don't think so,
Okay.
Joe. I think you're absolutely right on. One of the contrasts I have appreciated about, say, how we've structured business possibilities in the US so far versus versus Mexico or India. We
Right.
have these laws that allow for bankruptcy, but people aren't necessarily wiped out forever. So even though it's a big thing, but there's still this idea of creative destruction that the company could go bankrupt or the individual could go bankrupt, but they'll probably still have an opportunity to create again their lifetime. Where, again, as I understand it, in other cultures, you have one fall down, and that is it. You are not going to get back up.
But and something that I'm pretty interested in, it's one of those things is innovation, or what makes an idea scale to begin with. But one of the important things, and this is kind of critical when it comes to coming up with innovation and that essentially you're doing more with less, is the type of financial structuring that exists in the United States, in the way it uses, and I've done led some discussions on this, is essentially the way venture capital works, and that it's willing to fund an idea that will fundamentally change the way we function.
But sometimes only so far.
That's right. But not but traditional banks won't fund an idea. You go in there and you ask a traditional, and many countries have tried to mimic the venture capital model, even China to a certain degree, is to essentially, so that you know people that would come up with an idea that they could, you know, essentially change. I think 6 of the top 10 Fortune 500 company, or not Fortune, 6 of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world were all backed by venture capital.
Well, it's interesting because I truly believe that in many ways the days of the banks are limited, or certainly their power and influence.
Right.
And if you are large, I have a friend, a client who's a very successful developer, and the last office building he built a major building in the centre of Perth. He didn't go to the bank. He went to a superannuation fund and said, you will own half the building. I will own half the building. For your half, you will provide the capital to buy the site and build the building. And I will fill the building with tenants. And then I will give you the option to buy my half of the building, which he did. They built the building. He filled it with tenants. The superannuation fund took him out. They owned the building, but he made his profit on it. And so he didn't have to go near a bank. And so because the superannuation funds are looking for more investments, they're flush with funds. Their problem is finding investments. The other end of the scale, I'm just about to do a small property development. and I was mucking around at the bank, and I was going to miss the opportunity
Oh,
to
yeah.
buy the property. So I went to somebody I know and I've known for a long time who lends money. He's a very wealthy man, has a company that professionally lends money. And I said to him, look, you know me, I want to buy this, I need the money. He said, sure, you can have it now. How much do you want? There was no mucking around, no delay. I'd been dealing with a bank manager who suddenly I couldn't contact because he'd left the bank because he didn't want to be vaccinated. So I'd wasted 3 months of work dealing with him, and then he was gone. He wasn't with the bank anymore. But the friend provided the capital and I got the property. And it was much easier than dealing with a bank.
Mm.
And
I think
so
Wayne
beg
makes
pardon?
that point very, very distinctly. And when we've been talking to Wayne about, you know, creativity in real estate, you know, real estate just being an example and point, he said, gosh, if the bank's involved, you all work for the bank.
Hmm.
And it takes out the majority of the creativity.
Hmm.
So your point is absolutely well taken. So I was just trying to understand that, going back to that paragraph, because I'm just jumping in, that Bucky said you can't own your own tools, and then I'm sure there's more to it than just that, but I'll have to read the whole
yes.
thing.
Yeah, sure.
Shall we continue?
Well, I don't think we've actually started reading this, have we? The unique and superior advantage. That's where we're up to, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. The unique and superior advantage of the economic explorer maintaining his economic initiative in the face of the massive capital, staff and equipment advantages of the large corporations and great states who seemingly have top-heavy advantage is demonstrated by the lone individual's complete freedom of the checks and balances of bureaucracy. Walter Chrysler found that I could produce the full-fledged operating prototype of a better, more advanced automobile than could he and his Chrysler Corporation, and that I could do so with 1/3 the time and 1/4 the money. The US Navy wrote a report which showed that I was able, time and again, to produce satisfactory working structural innovation prototypes in 1 month with an average of only $5,000 and with the help of 30 university students, which were superior in every way to the results obtained by the Navy Department when dealing exclusively with their prime industrial contractors, which averaged them 2 years and $250,000, only to discover that such methods failed to produce any satisfactory results.
Oh,
Quite clearly, the individual initiative is at highest advantage with the least staff and property. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
I would reword that a little bit, but I agree
Yeah.
with 1000%. I mean, first of all, I can tell you with the Navy, it's true. I mean, you know, if you could get 30 people, you could probably run most of these places. That the engineers are good. I mean, but just 30 people to streamline their overhead. But quite clearly, the individual initiative is at highest advantage with the least staff and property. I would say instead of the least staffed, I would say the right staff. You know, that it's not necessarily just a number of having fewer people.
No.
Just it's having the right people in the right place. That's, you know, we end up, you know, some people say, like where I work, it's you know, 20% of it's like the 80-20 rule, essentially, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. So you know, that so and that it rests on the backs of a few. So yes, staff can be cut out. The problem is that the systems don't allow people to be efficient sometimes. And that's why maybe Bucky coming in from the outside was probably able to do some things that other groups couldn't.
Let me put it different. I think that the issue is that of flexibility.
Sure.
Because the conditions that are the most optimal, which are the most favorable for each stage of a process of inventiveness and production, to the result that you might be expecting are different. Let's just say that you start some stuff. Really, Bucky was talking here about him and 35 and 30 help of 30 students. It's not everybody who is a university researcher, something like that. Yet many people have many ideas. So I think that what was what was important at that stage were the conditions that allow him to think with the help of uninterested in terms of the reward. People who are motivated internally from in out, to be able to spend the time with satisfaction and joy of spending it towards those results. But then you reach a space, you talk about the venture capitalist. A venture capitalist is usually somebody who has had resources, the fat in there, and that is in tune with something or some idea, or somebody with some idea that he thinks interesting, and then say, okay, I'm able to sustain this, create a condition for this person to succeed. And inherently it has a lot of risk in it.
Yes.
Now, after that, maybe the idea became bigger, and then it comes to, you have hedge fund that come in there. Hedge fund has much more money, much more large pools, but their motivations are completely different from that of venture capitalists. Hedge fund they just want to make money from hell or from heaven. They want to make money. And then we're talking about the banks. The bank's function was never intended to be that of risking their funds.
No.
They removed Glass-Steagall in I think it was 1999, 2000.
What, Glass-Steagall, when they removed it?
Yes, 1999.
It was under,
They fully removed in 1999.
Yeah.
But Glass-Steagall basically say, your intermediation function, do it, commercial bank. The speculative side, which is the risk taking, don't go there because it's not your money.
Right.
So the banks, with all the deregulation and things, have been allowed to take deposit of people that are really, in terms of counterpart, are clear that there was energy spent by some individual to generate those resources and go and risk them. And yet, you see, the problems are depending on the scale and the resource to solve those problems require that we understand those conditions. Solutions always depend on how the boundary is. You know that in mathematics, the result of any differential equation or in integration depends on the boundary.
That's right.
And that's right for all systems. So we have to recognize, that's why I say flexibility is important here. What stage are we? And here, Bucky is still talking about the very, very initial stage of a pioneer entrepreneur. And that is where, independence and equipment enough for you to express that full bloom of creativity is necessary.
Can I just raise a point here? I'm just looking at that one sentence in the middle of the page. Quite clearly, the individual initiative is at highest advantage with the least staff and property. I'm now questioning whether the 60 years since that was written have changed the environment such that that statement is no longer accurate. I think of Atlassian as a prime example, or Canva, but Atlassian particularly. When Bucky wrote this, the technology wasn't there that's there today. And the ephemeralization that has taken place with technology, I'm asking whether that has rendered that statement no longer accurate. When Bucky wrote it, he said the individual initiative is at highest advantage with the least staff and property. But I'm now questioning whether in a company like Atlassian, which is a large company, but uses technology very successfully, the individual initiative has been encouraged by having many staff. And as I say, they're now building a state-of-the-art property in the centre of Sydney as their head office for their staff. And they may choose to go in there a day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. They may choose not to go in there. They'll have the right, according to the company, to choose to work from home. But whether the opportunity to go and interact with other people and bounce ideas around face-to-face rather than online, although they're obviously doing pretty well doing it online, I just wonder whether the changes in the time since that statement was written have rendered it no longer as true as it was.
I don't think that's changed.
I don't think it's
think
changed
that-
either. Yeah,
Hmm?
And
I don't-
it hasn't changed.
it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
I think
It
that it
is-
gets, okay, I'm sorry.
You see, you measure success as an aggregate, right? Of positive result.
Mhm.
But that depends on what is the reservoir. If your reservoir of what you are allowing to express is diverse, and that's what has happened with technology. Technology has enabled a lot more people to participate. So even at a certain rate of success of the individual, that remain unchanged, say, this is just for example, the result will be much more expressive and much more larger because simply many people are thinking in a different way, and there are many doing that. Technology enables that. But the intrinsic, it doesn't say that you become more intelligent. It says you, John, here, technology, what they allow here is the four of us here to participate in this conversation. And it will come from many, many different points of view that are more diverse. The result will be richer than John on the phone, only with me, with the old technology that existed of a landline, on your phone talking to me. Wouldn't be conferencing. That is what I think is applicable to you.
And we
But
wouldn't have had
still-
Joe and Susan involved as well. It would have been a two-way conversation.
Yes. So to me, clearly, individual initiative is still at the highest advantage of a lease and property staff. And you take this the example of Atlassian. Atlassian allow people to work on what they want.
Mhm.
That minimize groupthink, or let's say
Right.
sequence or organized groupthink in a way that you allow first the diversity to express itself, and then you allow it to be freely presented at an organized at a set time. So there is a lag there, and then once it's organized, the organization comes together now to really midwife the baby.
I will say it comes back to your original point. When I look at that statement, Manu, I think it has to do with flexibility. And at what point do you hit critical mass? And what Bucky's saying is that you're hitting it at a very with a very small team, with a very few number of people. Now, again, I think it's the type of individuals that you're actually bringing in, but I think that the statement is still valid because I've seen smaller groups of people that each understand their role and they're able to work very effectively with fewer staff and fewer resources.
So you believe that, the two of you believe that that sentence is still as valid today as it was when Bucky wrote it?
I think so.
I think so
I've
too.
written here, ephemeralization does not mean that we fail less. It only allows us to fail faster.
Yeah, I'm not clear, John. I'm gonna withhold judgment and see. I think Bucky wrote this early enough that one of the things that I believe I've understood has been a migration of business culture. And I think that's what you're getting to. But at the time that Bucky was writing this, there was the military, there was the university system, and there was the standard corporate. And I think that some of those advantages that have come from like the Apple and the Atlassian sort of creativity models, just they weren't there at that time.
No, they weren't there. That's true. That's true.
And so I'm gonna hold out on making a decision about how I feel on that sentence. I'm certainly willing to think about it.
Okay,
So
good point.
So we read on the rest of the page?
try one more paragraph and then
I
we'll.
have found it essential to take patents. This was proved as 50 large corporations applied to me to operate under my patents. On approximately all such occasions, the attorney of the large corporation said to my attorney, "Of course, the first thing my client had me do was to try to get around your patents. The only reason we've come to you is because your patents are too well written." This was to say that the industrial corporation would have ridden over me roughshod if I had not protected my inventions with patents. I would never have been heard of if I had not taken patents. The monetary earnings from the patents have been negligible in proportion to the accreditation of my abilities and my theoretical activities accruing as a consequence of the economic and physical success of my geodesic domes. My accreditation as a pioneer trend navigator and environment transformer, always concentrating on environment transformation, was confirmed by the geodesic dome success. I have taken a large number of patents in every country in the world in which I am allowed as an American to apply. I find that the world is so integrated that patenting within only one nation provides inadequate protection. Okay, it all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but what is putting in there again and again is the fact that, you know, the universe operates in dualities, but yet the way we are organized does not provide for that. You see here is that I find that the world is so integrated that patenting within one only nation provides inadequate protection. So in fact, in spite of my taking a patent to protect my invention, the world is integrated. It is happening. So therefore, I found that the practical way for me to go in order to pursue the ideals that I'm pursuing is to take as many patents as I can as an American. And that is important, and that's eating on you. Taking a patent is not cheap. You have to hire a lawyer in whatever country that you want to take a patent, and the lawyer, right, you know, you have to pay.
I know.
Yeah. So in Utopia, there will have been systems that allow for those to go in congruence with the fact that, you know, it is happening. But it's not in reality. So individually, you have to be aware of it. That's, to me, an important aspect. Otherwise, you are going to be eaten. If Bucky didn't have an attorney that wrote his patent, as he said, tight to protect, and the big corporation come with all the means that they have, they were eating him alive.
Well, that's what they did with Tesla, essentially with JP Morgan. So
What happened there, Joe?
Tesla and Westinghouse, if I recall correctly,
Mhm.
this has been a while since I read this, won the Niagara Falls contract, and which was one of the biggest contracts at that particular moment in time. And J.P. Morgan backing General Electric and Edison threatened to sue them, and for a prolonged legal battle that it essentially would have bankrupted Westinghouse and Tesla. And if and this is all I'm doing, I read this in high school.
Mhm.
And so if I remember correctly, there was even a point where Tesla had torn up his patents in order to stay in business with Westinghouse, like where they were struggling to begin with, if I remember correctly. But there's been it's something I should go back and read, but essentially that's essentially that they didn't protect themselves, and I think that was one of the an example where a corporation did steamroll somebody that had better technology.
Mhm.
Tesla was also taken advantage of by Enrico Marconi, who
Right.
wrote a bunch of his patents, and it didn't get through the US Supreme Court in the direction of Tesla until after his death. So he should have been the richest man in the world, period, based on all of his innovations. But he was a great inventor, wasn't the best businessman.
Mm.
Well, he only cared about technology.
Yeah.
That was the thing. No, whether that's
And
sometimes-
Susan, we're talking about here at one point about the devastation of the phenomenon of inflation
Mhm.
that murky everything and distort everything, and is only and always caused by money supply.
Well, here we
And
are.
it distort everything. I mean, we've been thinking people are they are focused on the value of their property going up, not knowing that they can't even afford it.
Relative to what? Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
It's
that's
going up relative to what?
Well, it's like something. It's like looking at this is my price earnings ratio. Well, in comparison to what? Like in other words, if it's not getting compared to anything else, then it's really not a measurement of anything.
Yeah.
Like like if you're comparing it to other industries, or if you're comparing it to other competitors, then yeah, but there has to be a measure against something. Actually, we're going to run over time.
You have to bring in the context of exchange.
Right.
I have time, right? I have time or energy, or I'm using energy. I need to survive, to have shelter is one of my fundamental. So I'm exchanging my time or whatever that I have for income.
That's right.
And how does it compare with my income? That's where it goes to be, in such a way that it has a meaning. And John talked about it before. It was 3 times your income, your annual income, to afford a shelter. Today is 5, 6, 7 times, 10 times even. Right? You need, I mean, if you take the average American and what he earns, and what I'm talking about is that after tax dollars, not before tax dollars. Because I mean, to pay, if I'm selling your house, you're not going to come and tell me that you're going to pay me with before tax dollars. You pay me with after tax dollars. How many years of your after tax earning can you exchange for a house?
Hmm.
And that's where we see that something has changed. between, say, some time ago and today.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's just about time to close it up.
Yes,
So John, how you feeling? What are you taking away from today?
Feeling excited. I think there's some keys in this for me to apply in my own business. So I'm going to go away and review it and work out what changes I make to make our firm a more innovative and nimble and successful business. So, yeah, it was a very worthwhile session for me. So thank you all for your contributions. And Susan, what do you get out of today? Your limited exposure to it, and
I'm excited to go back and have some cuddle time with material. I'm just super grateful to be connecting with you folks. I missed the call last week. There's just so many fun reasons to stay optimistic, and so I want to keep staying on that role. I think there's innovations, and as we come to appreciate the process even better, possibly each one of us can be agents for directing that forward. Manu, how do you feel, and what are you taking away?
Then I feel very, very appreciative. I realize that, people are here because they want it. And I'm really, really, I really value the time that I spend with this group. It is so informative. Now, what we've seen here is that you need to be aware. Life starts with awareness. And you need to be aware of your environment. You need to be aware of what you have to do to even progress and thrive in the environment. And Bucky was talking about it here in the context of a pioneer entrepreneur. You cannot just, and we saw the dire consequence. You talk about Marconi, we talk about Tesla, in that the environment, if it's not congruent to you, can eat you alive.
Yeah.
And you need to be aware of it. And that is important. And also, it has to be that there is no other way for us to buy into it if we haven't got at least sensitized to what is going on. We need to be committed to education. And that's why that point, self-discipline, I've been hitting on it. It is so important because self-discipline to me is what you do to have regeneration. It's a set of things that tailor to your inner individual that you think that you must do and becomes part of you. It's come like struts of your structure that must be shaped all the time because they channel the energy in the way you want, right? They help you to do that. And it is important that you have that and you know about that because we're talking about here too. We're talking about individual and systems, right? And then in order for you to know the system and to even know what it means for what you are pursuing, you really need to be educated. Education, 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 and practice. And it's so important. I've seen the result in my life in those who, unfortunately, it's blessing that you used to say, I can take you to the water, but I can't make you drink water. So we can take as many people as want to our water hole, but to drink water is up to them, is the individual. And that is their final examination. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that final examination is also influencing on us via the around thing. And we have to go. We have to make it as humans or fail as humans. There is no such thing that is the regenerative success of the individual. It's a regenerative success of the species in the environment we are. So that's what I take away. It is small, what we learn and apply is big into the synergies that it can engender. And that's the biggest lesson that I take from whenever we meet here and what we can do. I mean, what was John Denver? What can one man do? You know the song, right?
Hmm.
That's it. Okay, it is feasible. Joe, how do you feel? What do you take away?
Oh, I feel lucky. I really do. I'm happy Susan's here. We were going through withdrawal as a group after so after three sessions without you, we were just kind of we were wondering if it was just Oblivion, and so that's if that was the result. No, so it's great to have you here though. I hope you had
A
some
lot of
enjoyable time
responsibility,
away.
Susan.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
is. It is. Yes, it is. Yeah, Oblivion for the whole for the whole world. So no, the thing that's interesting to me is to think about how Bucky's predictions, and I've said this in the past, how in certain cases they've been spot on, but in this particular instance, he was a little bit off in his calculations, and I think it's important to think as to why he was off. He wasn't off in his analysis, and he talked about political systems that divide us specifically, or when he talked about the conversion of 40, I don't know if the numbers are exactly right, the conversion of 44% of humanity from have-nots to haves into 2/3 of this, of a century has come to an utter surprise to humanity. This conversion to have-nots. In certain cases, we have become wealthier, but to Manu's point, that wealthier is relative too, and so we need to think about it in terms of actual progress. I do think that there has been progress made, but not enough. And I really think just taking time and thinking as to why some of Bucky's predictions as to that everybody in humanity would have enough despite political systems in 20 or 30 years from the time that he was writing this, why that didn't occur. And I think thinking why that didn't occur would be a very important exercise. And I think we went through some of the reasons today. I really do. I appreciated everybody's conversations, especially around the idea of flexibility and boundaries as well. When we think about organizations that are flexible, but also structures that are flexible. Like, I mean, not only the organizations, but the means by which these organizations are sometimes financed. Their flexibility, I thought, was an interesting part. We were talking about venture capital for a little bit. So I think that that's an interesting takeaway as well, as the flexibility within finance. John, your experience, where you were incapable of doing or getting a business deal done with a bank, but you were able to do private money. And there's an element of flexibility, both, for as far as a financial structure goes, but it's also the organizational structure that he talked about a lot, how he was able to get more done with fewer people, and the way he was functioning more efficiently. I think these are important concepts as to thinking as to how he actually was able to achieve some of the things that he achieved. I dropped something in the chat. I have not read it yet. That recently Elon Musk had talked about patents. I think I would encourage everybody to maybe take a look at that. He talks about them as being roadblocks to innovation.
Or landmines.
Landmines. That's right.
Maybe.
And it could be. I think I'm open. I'm open to the idea. I haven't read the article or his statements yet. Could be, or it could be that that does put a lot of power in the hands of corporations as well. So, but it could be. I said it's something to think about either way.
No, most things have more than one side, and having a little protection for the individual. Yeah, I'll be interested to read it.
Me too, as to what his thoughts are as to why that, yeah, exactly, that he doesn't believe that them to be as well, how they may stymie innovation for whom?
Yeah.
You know, that's the question that we need to be asking ourselves.
I think one of the main things that we must have is awareness, and to avoid as much as possible the entrapment of ideology. Ideology can help from time to time. You take position on something, but don't get prisoner of it, especially life prisoner of it. So I wrote there that flexibility is conditioned by diversity, the ability to divide,
That's
and
right.
the technology to allow you faster combination in order to find patterns. And if you want to do that, is incongruent with just having one view or knowing about one view and getting prisoner of that view. You really need to be open to things that you don't know, because what you don't know is bigger than what you know. Everybody
And stuff.
that
Yeah.
has some wisdom always say that what you don't know is by far larger than what you know. And ideologies are based on what you think you know, not even what you know, what you think you know. I really like somebody talk about the metaphor of, and it's difficult. You see, you have a two-pitch roof, two-pitch roof like this, and you have the crit of a roof. And imagine that you are a lizard. And you're creeping on the crest of a roof. You know, you have to be able to look left and right? And maintaining that position is so difficult because everybody that is entrenched on this pitch or that pitch has a rifle and is pointing at you. How do you duck those? And to me, that is important. That is awareness, and that is education. You know, there is more and more danger. There is more, and your ability to live within that context that you can change is conditioned by awareness, is conditioned by education, is conditioned by practice. You don't practice, you don't live. Okay.
Well,
John is gone.
well said. Yeah, we lost John Butler with that.
Yeah, it's just time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. It's 4 minutes past the hour, which isn't bad because
No.
we started 10 minutes past the hour, or 12 minutes, because I had something I had to deal with here. So
Is
I'm
he-
stopping the recording.
okay.